Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Space at the Table. Thank you for popping in to join us for a really interesting conversation today, which I am very excited about. And before we get into too much of the chat, I would like to just introduce or allow our guests to introduce themselves for this evening. I'm the least important of the lot. My name is Wayne Fick. I am here. I'm going to be just hosting and asking some questions today because the chat today is not my area of expertise. So I will hand it over to my guests. And my first guest is the wonderful Lydia Smart. Lydia, if you wouldn't mind telling us who you are, what you do, and where people can find you.
My name's Lydia Smart, and you can find me if you want to.
Wow, is that a challenge?
If you're motivated.
Yeah. Only the very finest succeed, and that's how I like it, frankly.
It's a challenge.
Your bloodline is strong. You will find Lydia.
Yes. I'm a DM and creative director of Wicked Game.
I've heard of them. They're pretty good.
Not bad. Yeah, and I am also a writer and work in the sort of writing consultation field. But my background was in acting, and teaching and coaching young actors. So that's me.
Amazing. And Robin, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, hello, I'm Robin Milton. My pronouns are she, her. I started a games company this year called Fairer Games. My background is in teaching games development and a bit of events management when I left uni. So I'm kind of coming at this mainly from a video game perspective, but I have played D&D. I still feel like I'm very early days with it, so I will probably mess up on any key terminology, but I'm a big fan and love everything about it.
Thank you. And some of you may recognize our third guest, Charli.
Well, hi, I'm Charli. I use she, her pronouns. I am very ill right now, so my voice sounds rough as hell. I apologize in advance if I briefly disappear to have a little coughing fit, but it's fine. Wayne did offer for me to sit this one out. Don't worry, I don't need to unionize or anything. It's fine.
I swear I didn't force her.
No, exactly. It's fine. I'm an illustrator, writer, and lecturer, and I play on this cool stream some other heroes. I don't know if you guys have heard of it or watched it, but it's pretty good. It's pretty nerdy. It's pretty gay. It's a good time.
All the best things.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, and thanks, Rooney. Charli of Bulba Mum's fame. Yes, I do have a dog. Bulba.
That's true, and that's a probably good heads up. We are a pet-friendly stream, so if there are small furry creatures on screen or in the background of the sounds, we apologise, but we love it. So
we don't apologise. I don't apologise.
Never.
No, I suppose not. So a couple of notes before we kick off today. Our main focus today on this Space at the Table is to talk about women at the table. And so the format is going to be an open discussion about female representation at our tables and also in our games. Just a couple of things to remember. Obviously, this is a discussion from and about our personal views and experiences. It's not meant to be a definitive explanation or guide to anything, but hopefully will help everybody get a better idea of how we can improve those kind of spaces and improve our portrayal of female characters. As you know, at Some Other Heroes, a big part of what we're committed to doing is creating welcoming spaces for everyone, especially marginalized communities. And so we are unashamedly in favor of learning how to do that better, and that's why we wanted to do this. It's obviously a subject that can be quite emotive, so we ask everybody just to kind of be respectful. If you do get, emotionally triggered by anything, is just respect that these are personal opinions, and also just to remain open to learning and hearing different viewpoints on this as we talk through a whole range of things. Also, just a quick note that this is specifically discussing the experiences of women, as we will be doing future shows where we specifically dedicate time and space to other marginal identities. So this one we're specifically focusing on women. We'll try to get to questions in the chat if we have time. So if you do have any specific questions, please feel free to drop them in. But we've got quite a lot to cover, so we'll see what we can get to. And that's pretty much all of the lead up, which I think is enough. So thank you so much for joining me. I wanted to start today just by asking each of you one of the questions that I know popped up when I was kind of thinking about putting this together was, well, one of the comments, I think, rather than questions, was that I can't believe we still need to have this discussion. But I think we do. And so I wanted to ask, what has your experience been in terms specifically TTRPGs, but in general, in your areas of where you work and where you play, specifically in relation to sexism, misogyny that you've faced or being made to feel uncomfortable as a woman in those kind of spaces. Can we start with you, Lydia?
Yeah. And I'm immediately going to be very disappointing because for a number of reasons, but I think mostly because I started playing these sorts of games at about 26, and I had already at about 15 or 16, I got a modeling agent. And so then I also went to drama school and then was an actor for a long time. So any amount of misogyny and an awkward situation at a D&D table is nothing in comparison to some of the castings that I experienced, and just having that experience of walking to a room of men and immediately everything out of their mouth is absolutely terrible. It was sort of I feel, having said that, I feel really lucky because a lot of the people that I have played with, and of course the people that I play with now, are they're just decent people. they're above the bare minimum of what you want. And that needs to be Wicked Game.
That's so generous of you.
Our mission statement at Wicked Game is only just above the bare minimum you hope for.
Wow.
No, they're just people that think about stuff, and they're good, decent people. But there have been some grim years, and I think I've done a lot of taking it on the chin, years gone by, because it's sadly, a little bit par for the course with my background. But having thought about knowing I was coming on this and like deconstructing, I mean, there's some stories I'm simply not going to talk about because they're just upsetting for anybody to hear. But thinking about stuff that I have experienced at the table, and that could be, I don't know, it feels strong to talk about it as labeling it as strong misogyny. But I think, sadly, I think a lot of, it's not sadly, it is what it is, but I have actually made I've made men feel uncomfortable. And then that has been the issue. Does this make sense? Can I bore you with an example?
Yeah, please.
There was a group that I used to play with. This is a few years ago now. All chaps, and we were starting a new game, and I was creating a character that was a bard paladin, and I had discussions with this guy, the DM, a lot of discussions, and it was she's a spy. She likes to wrap people around her fingers. She's going to be the face of the party. There's no other charisma classes. She'll be the face of the party. She'll be the person that's always rolling, for persuasion and all of that kind of thing, doing the bartering. And she uses her feminine wiles to wrap people around her finger. We'd had a lot of these discussions beforehand. So I feel like I did my due diligence of communicating with the DM, the kind of character that I was playing. He said that is great, but he hadn't quite thought it through, because then first game, we're round at this person's house and it's just fellows, men everywhere, and me. and DM, and we're immediately on an island, and there's some like rough pirate captain that I have to, you've got to negotiate to get further on the island. La 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 la. Not important. But I go up and I'm like, okay, on the face of the pie. Flirt. I'm gonna flirt. Flirty. And immediately the DM flushes red and feels extremely awkward. And I think, oh, him, he's awkward. I'm not gonna stop. I'm not going to stop because we've had this conversation. This is my character, and you feel awkward because a girl's flirting with you, and all your friends are watching. But all you need to do is say, "Okay, roll for persuasion," and this flirting will be over. But he didn't do it, and he didn't do it, and I was like, "Okay, I'm just going to keep going." And then he kept kind of saying to me, "You realize this guy's really ugly?" And I was like, I did hear you when you described the character, that it's fine. And then he just sort of snapped. He just felt so uncomfortable and so awkward and so like humiliated in front of his friends that he just sort of went, all right, fucking hell, Lydia. He turns to you and says, all right, let's fuck. There's a bush over there. Take your fucking clothes off and let's fuck. And sorry if I'm not allowed to swear on this channel.
Oh, we're swearing.
It is fine.
Of course, what I did, which is a trait of a lot of people, but I think especially of women, which is I made him feel like his joke was very funny. So I laughed and I made it all feel like okay again, and sort of soothed the egos in the room, and then we just moved on. But I immediately knew that my character was worthless. Mm-hmm. Because he couldn't cope with he hadn't really thought through what it was going to feel like. And I kind of thought that's a real shame, because that's actually not me. That's a you issue. Yeah. We had communication, which is essentially at the heart of everything, right? Isn't it? When you're playing D&D or any other TTRPG, it's the DM's got to have a lot of chats and go, this is going to be the vibe of things. This is going to be the feel. Here are the boundaries, here are the veils, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think part of that we'll come back to kind of how we can do that and make those spaces sort of comfortable for those kind of discussions as well. But it's interesting that it is always that kind of question of how would that have changed if you were a male playing that role.
It would have been hilarious, wouldn't it? Because it would have been a guy flirting with another guy, which of course is absolutely hilarious. Yeah.
That's interesting, because I know a few friends of mine who have wanted to play D&D have been very put off from joining groups they don't know, because they've often been the only female who has kind of been interested or pitched up for that group, and they have felt very awkward there just because of the general vibe, the language, that kind of thing. So I think for us, it's kind of easy, like even with some other heroes, because we knew each other. So there was an existing kind of level, at least, of familiarity. So like you said, you knew that at least people were decent people. Robin, I know you've had a lot of time in the gaming industry as well. So, I mean, you I've no doubt have very varied experiences.
Yeah. And I mean, I should probably preface it with saying I don't fit, like, I haven't had a lot of, my brain's at full frontal misogyny. It's what my brain is saying as a phrase. But I think it works.
That works.
I haven't had too much of that, thankfully. And particularly on games projects, often they've been independent. So I've been working with people that I've chosen to work with, which, makes a big difference. I think a quintessential example is when I was applying for games courses and was actually going for interviews at universities, and I had a really bad interview experience with a head of course who was a guy, which started off with him being like slightly confused and shaken by the fact that I was a woman called Robin, because he'd been picturing someone else.
Right.
Which does happen.
It's so sweet and stupid.
It's just, whatever. But I felt like it kind of like, even in that moment, I was like, oh, this is okay. Where's this going? And then he kind of proceeded to sort of interrogate me as to why I really wanted to do games and why I was there, and was I sure I really wanted to get into this? And it was just it felt cartoonish. because I'd had really good experiences in other universities, to the point where and I think this is something that you and I discussed, Wayne, was like, you sometimes, because of the spaces that you're in, that you make for yourself, that are lovely spaces, you kind of occasionally like, you feel that maybe things are better, or like that would never happen to me kind of stuff. And then these things do keep happening, and like, we're still having to have this conversation now. And like, it was, what was it, like 11 years ago, that I was applying for uni. So like, fair amount of time. But I didn't think that that's kind of stuff would still be relevant. But like, recently I'm a Women in Games ambassador, and I won't give too many details because it's someone else's story, but someone had gone for a job, and they had their phone number on their CV. And then that was kind of, they were contacted after the interview in a kind of personal capacity by the person that had interviewed them.
No.
And it's, and it wasn't good. And
oh my God.
there's just a lot of it around. And I think sometimes it's like the more subtle stuff, where it's like, if you're applying for job roles, you have to think of ways to like safeguard your personal details as part of that process.
Yeah.
Which might not be something that other people think about, but it is certainly something that I've always been quite wary of. And it's just things like that. Obviously, there are kind of big situations as well, but it's just like slightly insidious things that you might not realize how much you're having to adjust your approach to things, or even things like going to big conventions, like on my own. But I kind of have an approach where like, I'm going to have plans in place. I'm going to let people know where I'm going, like what time I expect to be places, and just things like that. With saying it, maybe it's like, oh, that sounds really intense, but it's a thing that a lot of women do, because they feel that that's something they have to be consciously aware of all the time.
I mean,
because it's something that they'll be called up on if they don't.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that Chris and I have discussed as well. I mean, I obviously cannot speak for all men. You know, I can only speak for myself. But even as somebody who considered myself fairly aware of sexism and inequality when it comes to, you know, women and men and that kind of thing, when I actually started reading and hearing and researching how much of this kind of harassment women face day to day, I genuinely believe that 90% of men have no idea how frequent it is. Like, they genuinely don't. You know, when people talk about catcalling, or, you know, that your phone number being misused or that kind of thing, I think a lot of men kind of think, oh yeah, you know, it happens every now and then. I really do think that they underestimate, because they can't have that lived experience. Unless you are a woman, you will never have it.
There's that quote, isn't there, where it's like, it's not all men, but it is all women.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even just things like, I think there was a survey that came out about people being harassed on public transport, and I remember a lot of discourse around that, where people didn't realise quite how common it was.
Yeah.
But the people that were shocked weren't women.
Yeah.
Because they were all like, "Oh yeah, 100%, that's happened to me."
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure like everyone on this call that has had some sort of situation which has made them feel uncomfortable, or something that, you know, wasn't okay on public transport, and like, that's such a everyday thing.
Yeah, it should be something that you don't even have to think about being safe on, or being comfortable using. I mean, Charli, I mean, obviously we play together, so you have a wonderful experience with us. But how have your experiences been with facing any kind of, you know, this kind of sexism or misogyny?
Well, I mean, in terms of TTRPGs, I've been very fortunate in that it's mostly just been my friends that I've played with. I've never played a game with randoms or anyone who I didn't trust. Not on purpose. It didn't come up. I didn't refuse anything, but it just didn't come up. So I've been very lucky that I've been playing with very inclusive, very understanding, non-offensive people who will punch up instead of punch down, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think I've been fairly lucky in terms of the tabletop gaming space. I am, in terms of video games, I don't really play online video games for two reasons. One being, I'm a grumpy introvert and I don't want anyone else in my game. The other one being, I don't feel safe doing it. especially if you use mics. That's always been a worry for me, especially since, you know, you see the clips that people put online of the shit that gets said to them when they're streaming or when they're just playing. It's just a normal small game. I think that's always sort of grated with me and prevented me from doing it in ways I hadn't really realized prevented me from doing it.
Yeah, that's a big part of research at the moment. It's like it's quite hard to actually account for the amount of women that are choosing to not play online. And like how different would it be if like that wasn't a factor in it? Because it's like unless you're able to like survey everyone, there's lots of people like yourself where you're like, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to be exposed to that kind of experience. But the games companies don't necessarily. Well, I mean, some of them are, but there's not too much progress, shall I say, in that regard.
No. And similarly to what you were saying, Robin, I've got, just like you, we've got non-gendered names. So we get the added bonus of if we're using our real name anywhere, if it's a game or any kind of nerdy platform whatsoever, the vast majority of the time it will be assumed that I'm a man. And then you get the bonus shock of them realizing you're not, and then you have to kind of deal with that and feel that disappointment of, oh man, you just, okay, fine.
Ew.
Yeah. I mean, there is research that shows that with job applications, postal job applications, that submitting the same job application with a male and female name, there is a high percentage of the men's ones that will get called in or be shortlisted, even for the exact same CV with just a name change on it, if it's a female name to male name. And I think that's kind of, again, one of those little things where it's like, this is not something that is unusual. This is actually something that happens still a lot. Like, you know, the small moments of harassment and that kind of stuff. Like, it's like I say, I think it's difficult sometimes for men to understand because they will never be able to experience that. No. They just, unless they have lived as a woman, they cannot know what that feels like. And I think they genuinely don't understand, because I didn't, how prevalent it is and how often you do face these things. I mean, coming around to TTRPGs and you know, playing games like this, I know on the back of what we've just been talking about, one of the things I've noticed is that there are a lot of spaces or a lot of tables or games that we have seen or watched where the language itself has immediately, you know, we've noticed that this would not be a welcome space for women. This was, you know, where the comments and the slang and the derogatory names and stuff for women by a group of men around a table. Immediately, once you become aware of it, you notice that. So, I mean, I think, Lydia, you talked about having, you know, safety measures in place and, you know, lines and veils and things like that. Yeah. But in terms of creating space, what are practical ways that so DMs and players can ensure that women feel comfortable and welcome in their space? So what kind of rules or boundaries can you put in place that can help with that?
Yeah, I think I did a bit of thinking about this, knowing that we would chat about this. And I think one of the tricky things is that it is a set of rules that it's not really a gender thing. It's a set of rules that need to be in place and to make everybody feel comfortable. Yeah. And because I was trying to imagine, right, because we sort of said this already a little bit, that you know, Charli, me, we're all quite lucky because we play with people who we already trust. And so if there are slip-ups, I just know. I know through experience, but I know because they're people that I love, that if something were to happen, I'd get a call immediately and it'd be like, let's hash this out. This was a mistake. I'm so sorry. I'm going to do better. But totally. But what we're talking here, like this thing that you're talking about, creating this and this like pamphlet, is to help people who are doing that thing that you're talking about, which is I'm desperate to play some D&D. I need some social interaction. I'm maybe not great at it. I'm going to go and find a bunch of strangers to play with. This is already quite scary. And I was trying to imagine what it would feel like. I mean, I don't have to imagine. I have done this. When I moved out of London and moved to Norfolk, I didn't have any D&D. I didn't have a D&D group. And oh boy, the acute missing it that happened it was so strong, and I was trying to find people to play with, and I think in that situation, if somebody had said, I downloaded a special PDF about how to make you a woman feel comfortable at my table, I'd be like, oh fuck. It's such a great resource, but if somebody's gonna say to me, I have done a lot of thinking about how you're a woman, I would I can't tell you how fast I'd run. And so I think what it's much more about is those preliminary conversations being not being, because it's the same thing as going, I'm not lying, yeah, guys, I don't lie. It immediately makes you look like a liar. But having the conversations,
why are you saying that?
Exactly, right? Don't think of a pink elephant. It is you can have conversations that immediately let people know that you are somebody who is compassionate and thoughtful and careful with other people, and so then you are not just looking after women, but you're looking after queer people, trans, everybody. That's the important thing, right? Isn't it? So
and men too.
Yeah.
You make that a great point.
Yeah. So it was important to me that I built a world that didn't. I had a conversation with a friend of mine. Sorry, I know I'm galvanizing a lot of time here, but I had a conversation with a friend of mine recently that was around House of the Dragon. Because I came out of the first episode. Sorry, guys, spoilers for House of the Dragon. I'm just about to talk about it. I came out of that first episode absolutely seething and needing to scream at somebody because I can't believe there's immediately violence to women, and oh my god, how much longer do we have to consume this stuff? And then of course it the season did change. That's a whole different thing to talk about, but it was important to me that I created a world that didn't have women constantly dying in childbirth and tons of rape and queerness,
and that being the only angle for them to have any kind of character progression or development is through trauma.
Yes,
they're strong because they went through trauma or they grew up with 10 brothers. Those are the only options.
Strong women don't have to be conniving poisoners or men with boobs. It is a multifaceted world that just avoids a lot of this stuff. That we play games, whether it is computer games or tabletop games, because we need a fucking break from this shit world. And if I then sit at a table, which I have done, sat at tables that's okay, your plot line is about a huge amount of slavery and women being forced to have dragon babies, and they are enslaved and forcibly made pregnant, and it's cool, bro, I am definitely the only girl at this table because I just don't love it. It's not. It doesn't excite me because it's a fucking bummer. And I'm not a lot of the stuff that I do in my games is an absolute bummer as well. But it's not as a bummer in the same way that the world that we actually live in is a bummer.
Yeah. But I think that's a really good point to make. So I know you said kind of House of the Dragon is it's not TTRPGs, but I think that is kind of the core of what we're talking about here. Is that popularized representations of women aren't healthy.
No.
And that knowing or unknowing seeps into RPG games when these happen. And it's one of those things where the scenario you just described, would your fellow players have had a similar reaction if you just literally swap the genders?
Yes.
And I always think it's that weird thing where it's okay, well, this seems fine because it's literally been normalized throughout history, throughout books, throughout films, for years and years and years. And it's so people sometimes don't even hear themselves when they're oh yeah, and then all the women get completely trampled by society and it's kind of bad, but we'll still have fun. And it's and they don't understand why you're sitting there literally kind of horrified. And it's sort of I've been thinking about that a lot. It's when you watch these particularly when you watch television, for me, and like, I don't, am I focused on that more because of the work that I'm particularly doing around representation, or is it just that like female characters, there are some like glaringly bad examples, even with shows that are being made like in this year.
Yeah,
exactly. So it's kind of like, because I haven't seen that episode. I may or may not actually watch that episode because I'm kind of, like, life in general is pretty stressful. But I saw an article about it which is kind of talking about that, and it's odd that some people are more kind of affected by it than others, but it's just that weird thing where you're like, if we just literally same storyline, flip it, what are people's responses and what are people's kind of attitudes to that? And like,
it's like, Robin, you've read The Power, haven't you?
Oh yeah,
yeah, because we talked about it after we both
Wayne,
read it. Lydia and Wayne, have you guys read it?
No. Robin actually told us about it recently, so it's on my list now.
It's like, it immediately, what you were saying, Robin, reminded me of that, because I remember when we first, both of us read it, and we were just like, oh my god, there were so many bits in this book that I was like, that's fucked up. And then you take a second to think, hold on, that happens now, just the other way around, because it's like an alternate world, alternate universe kind of situation where the whole thing is shifted, the whole thing is on its head, and the power sits with the women in a really fucked up way, just like it does now with the men. And there were so many scenes in that book where I was like, oh my god, this is so grim, why did they go this hard about it, oh my god. And then the back of your head you are like, no, Charlie, that's happening right now.
But it's because the context seems alien, because the genders are reversed and the dynamic is reversed.
I love having moments like that. I don't know if anybody else feels the same way, but like, you were talking earlier about how you can be in a bubble because we're all kind of like, we curate the people who are around us, and then it's really easy to go, there's actually not that many people who vote Conservative. We're going to do fine. And then you absolutely shit yourself. You realize what the actual reality of it is. And it's a similar thing with a lot of things when you suddenly go, oh my God. And that's what I think I meant earlier on of like, I'm so happy to be around, to be playing with people who are not just like-minded, so I feel safe, but always questioning their own internal biases about whatever it is and being willing to be wrong. Like, that is so rad.
I mean, I think I've talked to Robin and I think all of you about this, but I do think that one of the things that made a lot of sense to me is when I was reading about the fact that the resistance that men feel to discussions about, what they've done wrong or how they treat women is so much based in this feeling of relinquishing or losing power. Because men have traditionally had the power, whether it's in terms of the head of the family, making the laws, running government, running financial institutions, whatever. It's been predominantly male. And so suddenly having to face the fact that someone is challenging you, someone who you have institutionally, even if you're subconsciously absorbed the idea that you are their superior, it's a power game. And even if you don't realize it, that's what's going on. And the more I thought about it, the more that made a lot of sense, because I completely, I can put my hands up and say, I remember when people started talking about, the things that men do to women. I remember that feeling of wanting to say, but it's not all men. I have to say, realizing
we must get it as we're for white people right now.
Yes,
totally.
Exactly.
But realizing that actually that resistance is kind of natural, but I have to just squash it for a bit and listen, was a real turning point in realizing what's actually going on and how I can change. But I do think it's very easy to get defensive. And I think, like you were saying, Lydia, about, calling somebody out on something, or if something happens in one of your games, you'd have a discussion about it and say, listen, that wasn't okay. I mean, I think that's one of the things I'd be interested to know. How do you call someone out for something like that in a way that doesn't feel like you're confronting them? Like, Lydia, if that happened at your table, if somebody used, derogatory language or something, how do you call someone in without making them feel like you're attacking them for making that mistake?
Okay. Well, first of all, you just have to do it, and it is. the sort of sad truth of it is that I spend a lot of time in those sorts of situations trying to preempt how to do it best. And that is also quite a feminine trait of like how hard can I possibly work to make everybody feel okay? And I think the difficulty is that you can never really know how somebody's going to react to it. And that is sort of in many ways, I mean, I don't think this is the answer that you want, but like it's not actually your job to make it, I mean, it's not your job. You shouldn't feel, if you're sitting somebody down and going, you fucked up, then that's not great. Just approach everything with compassion. And I think that is kind of enough, because they're going to feel uncomfortable anyway, right? I mean, I've had to do this a couple of times. And I think every time I have just gone into it going, compassion, 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 compassion. No one's a villain in this. They've just made a mistake. And as soon as you show them that mistake, they're going to feel like shit. Because again, I've also made people feel uncomfortable at the table. I've also fucked up a million times over. And the worst feeling is when ages later, it suddenly hits me like running into a brick wall, what I did, and that no one approached me. And that leads to second guessing yourself and driving yourself completely mad. And so I feel exceptionally grateful when somebody messages me and goes, doesn't feel good. None of this feels good. Can I please express to you how shitty this feels? And I will throw up in my mouth and then go, please tell me how what I can do to change. And I think the rule of thumb is, if you go in with compassion and say to somebody, that wasn't great, and let's talk about why that wasn't great and where it came from and how it can be different in the future. And if they throw their toys out of the pram and rant and rave and say they're never coming back, then okay.
Yeah, I mean, I always feel like if you approach a situation with the best intentions you can and someone chooses to react in a dickish way, that's not a reflection on you.
What are you going to do?
It's like, you're giving them that opportunity to be like, hey, this thing happened. I want to give you an opportunity to kind of think about it and like maybe approach it differently in future. And like, to kind of hark back to my teaching experience, that's the same. Like, I was teaching teenagers. If you go into a situation like, you did wrong, you are wrong, I'm going to make you feel bad so you can learn, that is not
no one learns when they
approach.
feel angry or ashamed.
It's like, that's not good. So you come into it and you're like, hey, so this wasn't okay. Do you want to talk to me about why I think this wasn't okay? Like, let's discuss it, blah, 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 blah. And it's the same with this. And I think Lydia put it perfectly. It's like, you approach it with compassion, but it ultimately, like, you are offering them the opportunity to learn, grow, adjust. And if the response is, I don't want to do that, and I don't care if you felt uncomfortable, then you have your answer.
Well, I was going to say that in itself makes a lot of decisions easier, doesn't it? Really?
Yes, it really does. Yeah, it really does. And I do realize that it is not easy for people. And I think when it comes to storytelling and collaborative storytelling, I think for a long time there has been, and I'm guilty of this because I did this in the old days, there is a little bit of like, there's got to be conflict in stories. What are you going to do if you have no conflict? If there's no bad thing, if you're not an orphan, if your character's not an orphan and it's, then then where's the conflict? And I think I think it's really good that we are now kind of going, bullshit. There's so many different kinds of conflict that you can have. And I've spoken to my other female friends that I play with, and one of the I'm getting off topic a little bit here, but like one of the resounding things that is like, don't make this content, please, in any game, is non-consensual sex. And my fucking God, the amount of times male DMs have wanted to include that in stories and go, but this happens. What, don't you want to confront it? Won't you feel great when you feel a rapist? And I'm like, no, can we not? my psyche is going to immediately go, you don't have to deal with that if you don't want to. And I will simply build a steel wall in between me and the content that you are creating. Because why the fuck would I do that to myself?
I mean, going back to what Robin said about flipping it, I mean, it's a very interesting thought to just very quickly flip that and think about how, you know, a male would feel if you said, great, we want to have the scene where you are raped.
Yes.
And how they would feel about that just being role play because it happens.
Yeah.
Well, I think sorry, I was just going to say on that point, to bring my teaching into it again, but like there again, often what you tend to do at the start of the year is you have a conversation with the students about what behavior is appropriate and what isn't appropriate, and you agree on it collectively.
Yeah.
And I know Wayne and I were talking about, we were actually looking at like inclusive events and like things that you can consider when you want to create an event that's actually properly inclusive from the start. And having, like, if you're doing a role-playing game, like having a collaborative, almost like agreed code of conduct can be a really, like, really reassuring thing, because then it also allows you to, like, together decide what you think is okay and not discuss those things. But also it allows the players to be like, if someone kind of slips up, you can be like, hey, remember that thing that we discussed? So you don't feel like you're calling them out from nowhere. Yeah. You're kind of just gently reminding someone based on something that you've both like agreed together. And that can be, but it's amazing how often that doesn't happen, and people are almost like, oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. And that's why code of conducts are so important to video games events now.
Yeah.
Because we've had years of people saying, oh, I'm sure nothing bad will happen. And then loads of bad stuff happens.
Yeah, weird that.
Yeah. So like now there are strict codes of conduct in place for like big gaming events, so that if something that is bad happens, it's not just a case that someone could be called out on it. It actually empowers the person that's involved with that to speak up about it, because they feel that
they can point at a poster and be like, hey, it says you are not allowed to do that.
No running around the pool. Yeah, exactly.
No, and you agreed to that code of conduct when you attended this event. So I'm able to talk to you about this.
And interestingly, I don't know if you agree with me, Robin, but especially if you're a woman who is like in a position of power in that situation, I've never done this kind of thing, but if I was DMing at a con, it's so much easier to go look at the poster, and if it helps, some guy wrote that poster, it's not me. It's so much easier to do that because
exactly. Yeah, you were able to kind of say that it's part of a system.
The sad truth of it is that there's a lot of men that really struggle to listen to a female voice and go, I'm going to do what you're asking me to do. Do you know what? I was thinking about this the other day. In fact, I think I was talking to the delicious Michelle, who's in chat, but I was like, I think one of the reasons why I am so obsessed with DMing, I'm so fixated with this thing, I love it so much, I do so much of it, I fill my life up with it, is because in my real life, I have had a lot of not being heard, not being listened to, being interrupted, being talked over, listening to men say exactly what I've said, and which was dismissed, and then people going, he's got it, he gets it, Lydia, listen to him, and me going, I just said that. And when you then are a DM, you're in front of a table of people who are listening to you and making notes, and if they don't listen to what you say, they are gonna not have very much fun. Oh my God, I can't get enough of it.
And you hold their fantastical lives in your hands.
I'm drunk on the power. When I tell you I'm drunk on power, I cannot stop. Listen to me.
You didn't listen last time, and that's why your character's stuck in this like smog.
Yeah.
Now what?
Okay.
No, I totally
so we need
that,
a code of conduct for your power.
Yes.
Sorry, Charlie.
No, I was just going to say it's one of the reasons why I love doing public speaking so much and lecturing so much, because I don't know whether this is a woman thing or just a neurodivergent thing, but the social rules make sense.
Yeah.
It's like, you're supposed to sit there and listen to me. Yeah. I'm supposed to stand here and talk for an hour. No one's going to tell me off for doing that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I think with TTRPGs around the table, that also that comes down to the people you're playing with, and I think that code of conduct could be a really good starting point. But the bottom line is that we've all been around tables where the people playing basically want to dominate the game. And they're too loud, they do too much, they won't shut up, they won't give space to other people. So I think that power play, it happens a lot anyway. But I think that playing with friends, it's a little easier to make assumptions on what that kind of base level of acceptable is. Whereas if you were going into a room with strangers to play a game, establishing that kind of code of conduct could actually be a real, just a real lifesaver, because you at least start from a shared agreement.
Yeah, well, it establishes the vibe between people that haven't necessarily met before. And by approaching it in that way of saying, like, we're going to have a discussion about what people are comfortable with, that already puts it streets ahead. So it's not a case of like Lydia was saying, like, I've considered that you are a woman and I've read online that in order to make you feel comfortable I need to say these 3 words. And I think that's very much, and it strays into othering, which is something that Charli and I have spoken about, where people are like, oh, better not swear, Robin's in the room. Like, I've had people literally be like bantering or whatever, like managers or whatever, and then they'll turn and be like, oh, sorry, Robin. And I'm like, I'm literally just sitting here like,
for what?
And it is that, well, because they were getting too, like, I don't know, boyish and
your delicate feminine sensibilities don't like it.
This is the insinuation. It's like,
fetch me a chaise
better apologise
so
to
I
Mum.
may faint.
I know. I mean, Lydia was telling us she used to do a lot of fainting when she was younger, so I'm not saying it was
nice. Hopefully it was dramatic.
Basically a Jane Austen character. Yeah.
But it's a bit like those things where they talk about the fact that they now have products that are specifically designed for women, and it's the same product in pink. Like that happens still so much, and but razors, pens, bags, toiletries, like the same thing, but for women. Why? Because it's now in pink. Like that, it shows such a lack of understanding of actually what. No one has gone out and actually said to women, what would you like that would be good for you as a product? No, it feels like men have assumed what women want.
The reviews on those are just fantastic.
Oh, like, they're so funny.
They're kind of like, thank you so much for designing this pen. I forever was like having to ask men to sign documents for me because I wasn't able to use their pen.
They were too heavy and my hand broke.
I've been trying to write with my finger for years.
Yeah, literally. The reviews
but I couldn't because it's my beautiful name.
The products are great, but like, that's where like the internet discourse can actually really help restore your sanity, because it's like, oh, thank
progress
God.
Through humiliation. That's one way to do it.
Hey, listen, humor can be a real saving grace sometimes when you have to point out stupid things like that. So just very aware of time, I wanted to have a quick chat with you guys about female characters. So one of the reasons that when Charli and I were talking about doing this discussion, one of the reasons she said she thought it would be good for me to be here was because I tend to play female characters. In some of the heroes, I play the first like male character I've played in a long-term game of any sort. And it's just one of those things I wanted to talk with you guys about for our DMs who are listening, and for players, if they want to play or portray a female character. Is just maybe talk about how they can do that in a way that's respectful, but also that gives us a bit of a 3-dimensional approach to female characters. Because as we just talked about in games and things like that, particularly video games, we know about the general sexualization of female characters, but there is also a very typical look, a very typical size, a very typical approach and the way they talk and all these kind of things. And I just think it'd be interesting to kind of see how people can make sure that is done without being too, I guess, insulting with the stereotypes or the cliches that they use.
Yeah, well, I mean similarly to like what you were saying about sexualization of characters, I think it's important to remember that not every character you build that's a woman has to be this sexless being. Because I think some people get afraid. They go from one extreme to the other.
Yeah.
So you can fully build a sex-positive sexual character, but make them 3-dimensional. Like, for God's sake, don't make them just a blow-up doll that's got dialogue somehow.
It's got a ripcord out the back.
Yeah.
That's literally what I imagined then. That was so graphic.
Yeah.
Haha.
Just on that point, just as like a little kind of nugget of flavour with this is a beautiful example of like how ridiculous some female character representations are. Is someone lovingly swapped the animation rigs between Batman and Catwoman.
Yes.
And it is
I know
one
what
of
you
the
mean.
best things I have seen. And like, I will, I wish I knew the person's name so I could give them proper credit. But if you just look like Batman, Catwoman, rig swap kind of thing. But it explains the ridiculousness so much better than anyone could in words, just by kind of fully showing you that. But I think the interesting thing, like Charli was saying, is like sometimes people kind of go, well, I don't want to sexualize her, so I'm just going to like do this. And I feel like that's really the wrong approach. But if you want to do it justice, it's going to take a little bit of like having to try and unpick representations of women from the male gaze, from the patriarchal society structure that they're within, and like actually really looking for kind of people's lived experiences and drawing from real people and real things that happen. Because otherwise you will unwittingly, and I do this as well, it's not just like, oh, if you're not a woman you won't realize, you accidentally fall into these tropes because they are so common and so like interwoven with just all media and all things that you're often consuming. Like it's so easy to accidentally just slip into something and then be like, oh God, I did it again. I made that assumption and I don't even assume that about myself or whatever. So it's like maybe kind of changing up your source material to be something that you would never normally kind of look at or read. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know, what's your approach, Lydia, when you're kind of building up sort of characters?
Well, first of all, just DM a lot, because you will have to make so many NPCs that in the end, if you're starting to get bored with your NPCs, have a little just apply 15 minutes of thought to that and take a look at what NPCs your players immediately go, can I go and talk to them? And they get like adopted. Sometimes you get adoptable ones because they're super cute, but also people, I think, again, like I'm really lucky, I've got great players. And I see them gravitating towards characters, and it makes me really proud. It makes me proud of them because they love a 3-dimensional character, but it makes me proud of me for making the character as well. Going back to that thing that you mentioned before, Robin, about like swapping genders, or like, obviously it's not a binary thing. So just moving the gender around. I have done some work with production companies on scripts that aren't ready to go yet. And that is always a really interesting situation where you're talking with producers going, can we look at what it looks like? Like, why is this person this gender? And is it more exciting if they're a different one? Are you making this because for tokenism reasons that they need to be because you're going to get funding if it's got a strong woman in the center? You do that and it scares people, but then it makes them look at it a little bit more, and it's an important set of questions to ask. And I just think again, I spend quite a lot of time fixating. I mean, that's not really a good bit of advice, but I am ADHD and I hyperfixate. And so I think about the characters that I love. And if they are ones that are improvised on screen, then they have to just be a very quickly sketched out thing. I'm not going to say that every NPC I've ever made
of course
is a 3-dimensional character, but the moment that they're made, I apply time to what that is. Perhaps some people might argue too much time, but you better believe if I'm creating for you a villain, a BBEG, a parent, a sibling, a love interest, anything, they are going to have a very real, a past that is very real for them. They are just they're going to have a set of likes and dislikes. Otherwise, and it was actually Tom who kind of brought this up to me. First of all, I think I was doing a lot of stuff on instinct, but it was our lovely Tom from Wicked Game who was like, sometimes with like romancing at the table, I feel a bit awkward because it feels like if you trot out these NPCs, and I don't want to romance them because they feel like blow up dolls. They feel like,
oh yeah,
if I fancy them, they don't have a choice. They've got to be my love interest. And I was like, oh, please can we actually play out a whole bunch of scenarios where I can reject you just so that you don't feel that way? Or you character, like, let's do that, let's go through it and come out the other side so that we're showing our audience, but also you feel it and everyone else feels around the table that you can chat up the girl at the bar or the boy at the bar, whomever it is, and they have a choice.
Yeah, you're not just browsing a catalogue of
exactly
women and just like, I will buy you.
I do make gags from time to time about how I'm a madam and which of my lovelies do you like, but the reality is we don't have tons and tons. We do have quite a lot of romance in this particular campaign. We got a lot of romance, but in the past we haven't had tons and tons. And so
there was sometimes the romance was bordering on incest, but that's a different story.
Come on now. I've already said that I watched some House of the Dragon. Let's get on board with that. I'm kidding. But I've been sort of waiting for an opportunity to just have somebody go, oh, I'm sorry, you're not my type, or your gender is not my flavor, or just no. Sorry, but no.
Yeah. But that also kind of comes to like, how commonly do we actually see that in mainstream media and content?
Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing was like, I can't remember what it was that I was watching, but it was like an interaction between two people, and I think someone like went to like put their arm around a character, and they were like, "No, I don't want you to do that." And it was really great to see because they had been like chatting and like had been really, like happy to be in interaction with this person, but they weren't happy with the physical touch. And like just having that little moment of them being like, actually, yeah, no, thank you, was just like, it shouldn't have been mind-blowing, because I was like, oh wow, look at that.
Because you never see it on media like that.
Asserting boundaries as a woman in a thing. Like, just like it shouldn't be that like shocking or jarring or like bizarre. And I think that's, like you say, that's a really interesting thing that can maybe become part of like role-playing games. So like some of my favorite interactions are where I've attempted to woo NPCs that are not like sexualized characters. They may be elderly, they may be like, just like whatever it is. I don't know what statement I'm making there, but like it's just that like you can have some kind of fun back and forth with it and see how it goes, and it's just kind of funny. But it's interesting that your player was like, oh, this feels uncomfortable because I feel like you can't say no, and it's like, that's really interesting as a conversation. And like video games don't necessarily do that a lot. Because it's like, it's that fantasy kind of prism where you are the protagonist and like the whole world is kind of hinging on you. So it's like it would be jarring for your character to be kind of rebuffed.
Michelle and I have talked about this quite a lot, because we've had moments where we're developing like romance games, and it is really important, that you have those things where it's not just like a buffet. You first of all, there's got to be room for preference, and second of all, you can't just, you've got to earn it. Because otherwise, what are we doing? We're just teaching that like grabbing tit is okay because that's what you feel like doing. It's grim, and it's actually perpetuating the thing that we're talking about trying to avoid.
And there are still enough video games that do exactly that. That is a male protagonist or a male in that game. You can go up to any woman and, basically just decide whether you want to romance them or whatever. And there is still enough of that out there that it's still being reinforced. So I think But it's one of the things I love about playing in a with a queer group of people has been such an eye opener for me at being able to play somewhere where I felt free to play characters like me. And the fact that actually I could play characters that would allow me to, be gay and have a romance, or be asexual, or be, completely pansexual, and be in a group where that was completely and utterly the norm and okay, rather than feeling like I knew if I was going to play a gay character in another group, I knew that there would be a bit of a like, oh, okay, that's fine.
It's like with Aisling. Aisling is canonically asexual. I've decided that that's the vibe that I want for her, and that's where she sits. But I can totally imagine, like you said, Wayne, if I was playing her in a group of people who I didn't necessarily trust, I would be bracing myself for the pushback, for someone being like, "Oh, she's just not met the right guy yet," kind of thing.
Or othering you. You used that term before of like. Is doing a guys, we've got to be everyone be super respectful because she's made a decision that her character's asexual. It's like, oh god, it's so fucking exhausting.
You suddenly become this China doll where you're just like, oh, careful.
Yeah.
But I think that comes back to what Lydia said. I think those kind of conversations in setting up the game and establishing what is okay, what's not, how you want to play things, I think those are so important, because even with the romance thing, I love the fact that I'm learning how people like Lydia and Josh and Chris, how good they are and how committed they are to kind of going, okay, what are the boundaries? Where are the lines? Where are the veils? What is this okay? What level of this is okay? Do you want to do this? Is romance all right? Because up until then, I had never considered that was even a possibility, that you could say, no, actually, I don't want to do romance. It doesn't. It makes me uncomfortable. I'd never thought that was possible, and I think that's incredible.
I mean, I think I do obviously we have our charity week every year, and we have games. Like people donate money, and then they get games with me, and in those, I do the thing that has now become standard for playing with people, which is an initial, really simple questionnaire goes out, which is what is going to make you happy in this game? Like, how much is it going to... You tell me. I'm not going to make it a like, oh God, are you on a scale of 1 to 10, are you like a 1 for gore? No, you just tell me what kind of thing makes you feel comfortable or uncomfortable with violence, with romance, with all of these sorts of topics. And then additionally, nearer the time, I also like to have just chats with people that are kind of like, what content do you like to consume? Because I think it's I do this when I create games for anybody, but especially with Wicked Game, especially with stuff that I'm streaming. I know what kind of experience my players are going to want, and it's all very, very, very different. That's about a third of planning a game, is like, I know what kind of thing Michelle's going to want to feel. I know what kind of game Nikki wants to play. I got a good feeling of what Tom wants to play, and I try and give them a tailor-made experience. And then there is the general bar for what everybody is comfortable with. And I think that doesn't necessarily need to be a 25,000 page questionnaire. That can be like, are you a Buffy person or are you a Game of Thrones person? Like, what is your... what content do you consume and why do you like it? It's a fun conversation to have, and it's about getting to know people and then going, right, I think I know what kind of game I can give you, but check in after games. Like, how do you feel? What did you like? What didn't you like? Like, let me learn as much as I possibly can, because I only want to be better.
But I think that's kind of key, is that actually I think that's what a lot of people could do to make their games more welcoming and more, I don't know, just a more comfortable space, particularly for women, but for everybody, is that kind of actually checking in whether there's something you need to change, rather than assuming,
oh yeah, for sure,
you've got it. You're making the rules, it's your thing. That checking in and actually going, how's this going, guys, actually makes such a difference. It makes players feel so valued as well.
Yeah.
And the audience will pick up on that too.
Mm.
If the players feel comfortable, the audience know they feel comfortable.
Yeah.
So last question. Do you have any examples of great, well-written female characters from any kind of media that you can think of that you could share just as a kind of a last throw out there for people? Robin, we'll
Charli,
start
do you
with
want to go first?
I
Because I know who I'm
mentioned my
saying.
two. Yeah, I mentioned my two before we started the stream to these guys. My go-to are always Buffy and Cora in terms of good representation, because I always remember when I first took in that media and watched those two shows, the sense of relief and just like joy from seeing these female characters be strong and capable, but also deeply flawed in very human ways, and not being this like omnipotent, crazy powerful character who only gets sad when boys are involved. It's like there's genuine issues internally with those characters, and that just made me so happy. I always default to Buffy and Cora, because they're the ones that make me feel just very relaxed, even though it's tense and terrifying sometimes. It makes me feel just like I'm not going to get pissed off with the way these characters are written.
Yeah, I mean that's my character is Lagatha from Vikings, who I just
perfection.
It's almost like I feel like I was spoiled with Lagatha, and now all other female characters for me, I am kind of measuring against the way that she was written.
I'll be watching a thing and I'll be like, would Lagatha do that? No.
Yeah, it's made me a lot more kind of like critical, being like, this character is one-dimensional, and like I'm not going to kind of fangirl them just because they're like designed to be the kind of like strong female lead or whatever, and like I think the really important,
the reason why, because you said that before the stream, and I was like, "Fuck, that's my brain would work."
I want that one.
But I think that one of the reasons why Lagatha is absolutely such a perfect answer to that question is her arc. It's great, because from what you think about the journey that she goes on, and the it's always about how she walks through her conflict, right? How she is, again, she's a flawed character, and she deals with trauma and pain in very different ways each time she does, but she just grows and grows and grows. She's a wildly more interesting character for me than Ragnar. You know,
easily.
Because he just has that thing of like the hubris and the heroics and the like go, I know I've got a destiny. But she is like, she questions, she's curious, she makes mistakes, but she's so insanely powerful, and she's not so many different sorts of women along the way.
Yeah, and totally. I was saying to Wayne before, like there's a scene where I don't want to spoil anything for people, but basically there's a scene where she's having a conversation with her son about someone that they both have a potential romantic interest with, and which obviously as a dynamic is interesting. But the thing is, she, like in the case of like 6 minutes or something, she goes from being like a jealous lover to a loving mother to being a complete warrior to being a political animal. And it's like, the thing I love about her character is that they never compensate. Everything is 100. She can be 100 at everything.
Yes, yeah.
And that for me felt like so exhilarating, to have a character where it's not like she's strong despite the fact that whatever, or like she is in love with someone despite the whatever, and it's like,
or
it's
like a therefore.
She can't be a
strong,
real mother because she's too powerful.
Yeah, she can't be like sexy and warrior. Like she can't be.
I'm
like,
sorry, but
warrior.
There
not
are
even like
male characters out there that are written that are like. I mean, it was funnily enough, like going way back to if you read any of the Arthurian individual Arthurian tales, they are all the fastest, the strongest, can jump the highest, are the best looking, are the greatest lovers, can sing the best, can butcher an animal during a hunt better than the rest of them. You know, they are
while riding a horse and playing a lute.
You go, okay, so it was Tristan that was like the one that was the fastest and the most charming, and you put it down, you put, oh no, it was actually Gwaine. All right, so you're actually and it would do that one after, and we'd never get that with women. They can be pretty and quiet, and those are the only two things that they can have.
Yeah, because if they're going to be strong, they have to sacrifice femininity and motherhood and all this other stuff.
Yes, or they have to be perfect. And that's the other thing, is like, if a woman is representing a particular thing, she has to do it in a perfect way.
Yeah.
She's
it's
not
why
allowed
I like
to be
flawed
flawed
characters like Buffy and Cora. Like the episodes where those two fuck up, and they fuck up deeply, and it's like, why the hell would you do that? Oh my god. It's the ones that make them the most interesting characters.
To be absolutely contrary, I was actually going to say Rhaenyra from House of the Dragon, because she, going back to what we were saying before, she's we see her go through her sexual awakening, and she's in charge, and she doesn't she won't be shamed, and she is she has basically a lot of the things that we've already talked about. She is flawed, but you know, also very good at a lot of things, and doesn't require male advice, but also doesn't have a screaming match in order to have her voice heard. It's she has a very good patient power about her that is great. And I was so grateful, because I was like, can we stop making stories written by this guy, because the women suck ass. And then actually we did get a couple that are not just like a mother or a cunning woman or butch, they're complex in their strength.
It's almost like women are all these things and can be multitudes.
Let's not commit that. Not yet. Let's not
That's a bit much.
Like an example that I thought of when you were talking about that was like Yennefer from the Witcher series. And she's a very complex character for me, because on the one hand she has elements to her which I like respect a lot, but I very much felt in the TV adaptation, and like I'm a huge Fake fan because I didn't play the first two Witcher games. I got really into the third one, so I'm just going to self-label. And when I was watching the TV program, like a lot of her character development is just based around the fact that she can't have children, which is a valid kind of element, but it kind of jarred with me a little bit, and it made me kind of feel like I felt it, although that is something that women experience, it didn't feel like it was told from like a woman's perspective or a woman's experience of that thing. And it felt quite like, well, she's like this because of this thing.
Totally. It's why I didn't gel with Black Widow that much.
Yeah.
It's why I don't like many Marvel female leads, because I just think that they really missed some points there. She's
only so powerful because she had her womb ripped out.
Yeah, and it's just
but it wasn't done in a considerate or a sensitive or like a introspective way. It was just done in like a this happened, which I think is why it kind of, I was a bit like, wow, this is like really intense, but you're kind of talking about it like it's just a normal run-of-the-mill thing that's happened.
It's like an anecdote to explain her behavior kind of thing.
Yeah,
exactly. And like, and particularly around like fertility, I think is something that should be written in a way that's really considerate.
Oh, God,
and like it should be talked about, because like, it's a thing that happens, but like all too often, like fertility, giving birth, motherhood, all of that stuff is like, people just gloss over it, and they'll just be like, oh yeah, well she had X number of miscarriages and these things, but they're not handled in like a sensitive way that's like
because they're often not dealt with by women.
No,
this is what I mean.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I think I would be extremely surprised if a woman wrote a script where there was a line that was just a throwaway line of she's suffered 14 miscarriages already. I don't like, you get it a lot in period dramas where for shock value it's like, I've had 10 children and 2 lived is a line that you hear a lot, like through period dramas you just hear it so much. But I think you know, we're coming to a place where there are just a lot more women writers out there, and when you do hear that line, it doesn't just float like a fucking horrendous little iceberg on its own. Like, it comes with weight and consequence, like it should. Like, of course that happened. Of course that happened. Like, it would, that is a reality of our past, but it has to come with other stuff. It can't, you know, it's just grim. Can I have one more?
Sure.
Strong woman.
Okay. Of course.
Because I could talk about this film, I could bore the tits off people with this film, but it's Arrival. Amy Adams in Arrival. Such an incredible character, who what I particularly get so excited about with this film is that the premise, for those who haven't watched it, absolute spoilers for this film, is that they need a linguist to come and work out a way to speak with aliens, and she's the best. So they bring her in, and she is absolutely the best. And she is in clothes that make sense in the whole film. So hazmat suits and comfortable clothing, because please don't fucking put her in heels.
No heels in an open field.
Skin suit lycra.
Yeah, no, none of that. It's stuff that just makes sense, which I know is absolute bare minimum, but it's still pretty exciting. And of course, because she's never wearing makeup, she's constantly got greasy hair because she's working every single hour of the day to try and work out how to speak to aliens. And people around her fall in love with her because she's so talented, so fucking talented, that people fall wildly in love with her. And her reaction to all of that is, oh yeah, okay, I've got a job to do. I mean, that's great, you're all right, like, let's have a kid together, that's great, but it's so secondary to the important thing, which is aliens. It's aliens, guys. That is way more exciting than Hawkeye, who wants, like, is always in my ear. Like, you're great, but actually aliens. And that, you know, is for me so exciting, because she's talented, she is beautiful, but that's the byline. That's the thing that gets skirted under. She is just brilliant. She's just brilliant.
But and I think that for me, that so much comes down to them. Somebody really thought through and understood what drives her, as opposed to just assuming that if a man wants to throw himself at her, she's going to go, oh, let's go that way. They know that actually that would not be a priority for her. Yeah.
And I think it for me, it's such a great thing to constantly lob out at people who are like, come on though, because people do like that. Like people want to go to the cinema. You can't have a poster that doesn't have like somebody looking appealing on it, and people love romance, and I'm the first one to go, I love romance, but then I just go, yeah, but my favorite film in the world is Arrival, and that is actually about having the back of your head blown out because you've learned a new language. That's the premise of the film, is that language will blow your mind. And it's really got nothing to do with, you don't need all of that stuff. Stories are so powerful and multifaceted, and don't need to be put through that whole stencil of you've got to have this and you've got to have this and you've got to have the page 26 plot turn. No. It can just be other stuff. It can be all sorts of things.
And I think that sort of comes to seeing how stories are evolving now, so that you can have a full storyline with a woman, which doesn't then drag it back to like, but of course what she really wants is to get married and have kids. Yeah. Because that's like, so often you'll be like, oh yeah, really cool, yeah. And then it's like, when the film goes, no, hang on, she's allowed to be independent so that she's unavailable and desirable, but really, what she really, and it's like, and it's so freeing and exciting when you have these characters which do exist outside of that kind of formulaic approach, which was like seen so often before. And it's like, it is really like, just, so exciting. I can't think of a better word. To see those characters and be like, oh my God, like women can live full lives independently.
I know it sounds so sad, but it's so true, isn't it? That we get so worked up about
so
something which
starved of
is
it, though.
actually the standard for men.
I think that's why it's so important for me anyway to talk about how we can make these kind of characters for me and representation just feel more real when it comes down to queer characters as well as women and other gender representation, is because actually it makes for so much more exciting and interesting stories and people.
Yeah.
Like that's one of the things that really excites me, is that actually when I see characters that I'm like, oh my God, that's exciting, because they are an asexual satyr who doesn't want to fall at the first flirty man, or they're a grumpy old lady, but she's also incredibly mothering, and she's also a kick-ass barbarian. And those are just Charli's characters.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things that I really have realized, is that flawed characters and characters that have all these things that are not just what you assume are the most interesting. So that's why I think it helps for us to look at what makes more interesting characters and more three-dimensional representation like this. I could talk to you all night, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap up for this evening. Thank you so much, everybody, for being in chat. And thank you so much, ladies, for joining me this evening. I really can't tell you how much I appreciate it and how much fun this has been.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we will have more of these on all sorts of topics. So we will definitely have you guys back to talk about characters and various other things at some point. So before I wrap up, all that is left for me to do is just ask my lovely guests if they can tell you if they have anything coming up that you should be watching or checking out. Lydia, shall we start with you? I mean, apart from the fabulous Wicked Game.
No, I mean, I was just going to say that. I was going to say Wednesdays, Wicked Wednesdays, head on over to Wicked Game. We run our Arcane University 5th edition, Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition campaign. It is lots of fun. They're currently solving a murder, so that's fantastic. And all my other work is just so in the weeds of development that I won't point you in that direction.
There is definitely enough happening on Wicked Game to keep people going.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And Robin?
Yeah. So I think the best place is Fairer Games. We've got a Twitter account which is Fairer Games Ltd. And my Twitter is Robin Game Dev. And I'm going to try and get better at posting things, because I tend to do this thing where I'll just be ridiculously busy and doing loads of stuff and then just don't tell anyone what's happening. And that's not a great way to run a business or build a game. So keep an eye out there, and I'll try and get better at updating that and putting stuff out there more regularly.
Amazing. Yeah, we can't wait to see your game, and we will share more information about it. And Charli, before you collapse into a heap of sneezels.
Before I fall into a puddle of mucus, I will say you can find me at charlivince.com. My Charli spelt without an E. All my social handles and shop and everything are on there. I'm not going to be anywhere exciting anytime soon. I'm pretty much just going to be in a blanket on the sofa. So, just have a look at my social media, and that will have stuff on it.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for joining us. And look, Buddy Dad.
The baby.
He's been desperate to be on stream.
I know, he's been walking around the back very nonchalantly, basically saying, "Notice me."
Typical man, honestly.
Look at that face. Anyway, before I fall into a puddle of adoring cats, thank you again, everybody, for joining us at Space at the Table. And we will, we will be back, hopefully with Charli, if she's feeling well enough, this weekend for the next episode of Some Other Heroes. So that will be at 3 p.m. this coming Sunday. So please do join us then for the next episode, where we are finding out some juicy information as we discuss what's happened in the last few episodes. We will be notifying everybody. Watch out for our socials about when the next Space at the Table is. So thank you once again, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Malloy, for joining us.
Malloy!
Have a fantastic day. Take care of yourselves, and be good to each other. Thank you.
Love you all.
Bye.